Claire Dawson never expected her quiet life to take such a strange turn. She was 32, married for almost 6 years, living in a small, artsy suburb just outside Portland, Oregon. Her husband, Ethan, was stable, thoughtful and dependable, the kind of man who always made sure her car was full of gas and her coffee cup was warm on cold mornings. They had met at a photography workshop when Claire was still working part-time at a bookstore. Ethan had been shy but confident in his quiet way, and over time they fell into a rhythm that felt safe and comforting. They bought a small home, decorated it in neutral tones, hosted dinner parties, and made plans for someday maybe kids. But safety sometimes hides silence. Over the last year, Claire had begun to feel like something was missing. She couldn't name it at first. It wasn't love. She still cared deeply for Ethan, but the spark, the one that made her feel alive, seen, even wanted, had faded into routine. She didn't blame him. And truthfully, she didn't blame herself. Life just settled. Then came the weekend trip. Ethan had planned it as a surprise, a cozy mountain cabin near Mount Rainier. No work, no phones, just the two of them. Claire was touched. Maybe he felt the distance too. Maybe this trip was his way of pulling them closer again. They arrived on a Friday afternoon. The cabin was beautiful, modern but warm, tucked among tall pines with huge windows that looked out into the forest. The fridge was already stocked, the firewood stacked. Claire felt hopeful for the first time in months. That evening, as they sat on the deck wrapped in blankets, sipping wine, Ethan turned to her. "There's something I want to ask," he said, voice steady but low. Claire raised her eyebrows, smiling. "Sounds serious?" "It is," he admitted, "but I don't want you to feel pressured." She waited. "I've been reading," he began, "about relationships, about ways couples reconnect when things start to feel stuck." She tilted her head. "Okay. And I came across something. It's not for everyone, but it made me curious. What if, just once, we tried something completely unexpected? Something to shake us out of the ordinary." Claire narrowed her eyes, trying to read his tone. He wasn't joking. "What are you saying, Ethan?" He paused. "I met someone online. A man. Just one conversation. He's respectful. Married too. We talked about sharing, about inviting someone else in for a night. Not to replace anything, just to feel something different. Together." Claire froze. The words hung in the air like cold fog. She blinked, unsure if she'd heard him right. "You want to bring a stranger into our marriage?" "No," he said quickly. "Not permanently. Just once, as an experience. Only if you agree. Only if you wanted to." Claire stared at him, heart racing. Her first instinct was disbelief, then confusion, then, unexpectedly, curiosity. Not because she had ever dreamed of this, but because something about the idea woke up a part of her that had been sleeping for a long time. A part that missed being noticed, touched, seen in a new light. Still, she didn't speak right away. Ethan reached for her hand. "I'm not asking for anything you don't want, but I just thought, if we did it together, maybe it wouldn't feel like drifting apart. Maybe it would be a way to grow closer." Claire looked away at the trees. The wind was soft, the stars above them quiet. That night she barely slept. The next morning, she surprised herself by saying yes, not with full certainty, not with excitement, but with a strange, cautious agreement. One night, no strings, only if it felt right in the moment. Ethan promised to set it all up safely. No pressure. Total control. She watched him message the man. His name was Julian. Early 40s, married but in an open arrangement. Respectful, direct, and according to his photos, strikingly attractive in a mysterious way. Dark eyes, warm smile, a quiet strength. Claire didn't know what she expected. But it wasn't this feeling, this pulse of nervous energy that followed her the rest of the day. She felt like a teenager again, unsure, excited, afraid. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the trees, Julian arrived. Claire opened the door. He was even more striking in person: tall, well-dressed, polite. His voice was calm and kind, his words gentle. He didn't push, didn't flirt. He simply sat with him, drank wine, talked about books, travel, his own marriage, and how honesty was the only reason it still worked. The conversation flowed easily. Claire found herself laughing, listening, noticing the way Julian looked at her, not like Ethan did, not like a husband used to routine, but like a man seeing a woman for the first time. And Ethan, he watched too, but with surprising peace. There was no plan, no steps, just presence. Hours passed. The fire crackled low. Julian stood to leave. Sensing that maybe the night had reached its edge, Claire walked him to the door, and that's when everything shifted. Julian turned to her. Slowly. "Thank you for the conversation," he said. "It's rare to feel this kind of comfort with people you've just met." Claire smiled, unsure what to say. And then he did something she didn't expect. He gently lifted her hand, kissed it just once, and looked her in the eye. No rush, no assumption, just connection. When the door closed behind him, Claire stood there for a long moment. Heart, Thudding. Ethan came up behind her. He didn't speak, just wrapped his arms around her waist and rested his chin on her shoulder. "I think I understand now," Claire whispered. "What?" "What we were missing?" Ethan nodded. "Me too." They didn't speak about it again that night, but something had changed. Not just because of Julian, but because the moment forced them to see each other differently. Claire realized she'd buried her needs under politeness. Ethan had hidden his fears under structure. They weren't broken. They were just disconnected. And now, suddenly, a door had opened. Not to infidelity, but to truth. Claire lay in bed later, staring at the ceiling. She wasn't sure what shocked her more, that her husband had brought a stranger into their private world, or that a single moment with that stranger made her feel more awake than she had in years. Not because she wanted to be with Julian, but because for the first time she realized she had been lonely. Quietly, respectfully lonely. She had been loved, but not deeply seen. Until now. And she wasn't sure what that meant. Claire couldn't forget the kiss on her hand. It wasn't romantic in the typical sense. It was respectful, slow, and yet it stirred something deep inside her, a feeling of being truly noticed. It wasn't about Julian. It was about her, about what she had been craving without even realizing. The next morning was quiet. She and Ethan moved around the cabin like everything was normal, making breakfast, pouring coffee, watching the trees sway through the windows. But beneath the surface, Claire felt something different. Not tension, not guilt, just awareness. Ethan caught her looking out the window and asked, "Are you okay?" She hesitated. "I don't know." He set his coffee down and sat beside her. "Last night made you feel uncomfortable?" "No." She interrupted softly. "It didn't. That's what's strange. I thought I'd feel wrong. But instead, I felt more like myself than I have in a long time." Ethan looked down. "I get it." Claire turned to him. "Do you?" He nodded. "I've been thinking about how much we've changed. The routine, the distance. I thought that experience might bring us back together. But I didn't expect it to wake something up in you." Claire spoke carefully. "It didn't make me want Julian. It's made me realize how long it's been since I felt fully seen." Ethan reached for her hand. "So what do we do now?" She didn't have an answer. Back home, everything looked the same. The gray couch, the framed wedding photo, the candles on the kitchen counter, but Claire didn't feel the same inside. She couldn't just return to normal. That night at the cabin had opened a door, and pretending it hadn't would be a lie. She tried. She went to work, had coffee with friends, smiled when Ethan kissed her goodnight. But something was different in her eyes. She began journaling every night, asking herself questions she'd never dared to before. Did she love Ethan? Yes. Was she still in love with him? She wasn't sure. Had they built a life together? Was it the life she wanted now? That question haunted her. Then, a week later, Julian texted. Not in a flirty way, just a message. Hi, Claire. I just wanted to thank you again for the kindness and honesty that night. It stayed with me. Hope you're doing okay. She stared at the screen for a long time before replying. Thank you. That night stayed with me too. They began messaging once a day. Light, respectful, thoughtful. Nothing inappropriate. But Claire found herself waiting for his messages like little anchors in her day. He asked her questions Ethan hadn't asked in years. What did she dream about as a girl? What made her feel alive lately? What scared her? She found herself answering with honesty she hadn't shared with anyone, not even her husband. It scared her, but also thrilled her. Ethan noticed. You've been quiet lately, he said one evening as they watched TV. Claire didn't lie. I've been thinking a lot about him. She turned to him. About me. He nodded, but she saw the pain behind his eyes. Is there something I should be worried about? Claire hesitated. I think I'm feeling things I didn't expect. And not just because of Julian. It's because something inside me woke up, and I don't know how to put it back to sleep. Ethan stood and walked into the kitchen. When he returned, he said something that surprised her. I think we need time. Not apart, just space. To be honest with ourselves, I don't want to lose you, Claire. But I don't want to hold on to someone who doesn't feel whole either. She looked at him, eyes full. That's the kindest thing you've ever said. Over the next few weeks, Claire moved into the guest room. They lived like quiet roommates, giving each other space to breathe, to think. Ethan started going on long walks. Claire spent her evenings writing. She continued texting Julian. Eventually, they met for coffee. It wasn't a secret. She told Ethan. He said he trusted her. The meeting was simple, no hidden motives. Just two people sitting across from each other, eyes searching for something unspoken. Julian was calm, careful with his words. I didn't mean to cause trouble between you and Ethan. Claire smiled gently. You didn't cause it. You just showed me how numb I'd become. He nodded. So what now? I don't know, she said honestly. I'm not ready to jump into something new. But I think I need to figure out who I am again. Julian respected that. He didn't push. He offered his friendship and nothing more. Still, it was more than Ethan had offered in months. Spring came quickly that year. The flowers bloomed early, and so did something inside Claire. She started painting again, something she hadn't done since college. She took solo day trips, rediscovered bookstores, cafes, even poetry. She started dressing differently, not for anyone, just for herself. Ethan watched her from a distance. Sometimes they'd have dinner together. Sometimes they wouldn't talk at all. The space had become something they both needed. One night, Ethan knocked on her door. I miss you, he said. Claire looked up from her journal. I miss you too. He sat across from her. You still see a future with me? She paused. I see a version of us that might still exist, she said slowly, but only if we stop trying to go back to what we were. Because I can't unlearn what I've felt. Ethan nodded, eyes glassy. And what do you feel for him? She took a deep breath. Curiosity, respect, maybe a little attraction, but mostly, it's not about him. It's about the part of me he woke up. Ethan nodded again. I think I understand, even if it hurts. He stood, walked to the door, and turned back. If we do find our way back, I hope it's with the people we're becoming, not the ones we used to be. Weeks passed. Julian continued to message her occasionally. But Claire had started pulling away, not because she didn't care, but because she realized her journey was no longer about him either. It was about reclaiming her sense of self. Then one day, Claire got a text from Ethan. I'm going away for a week, taking time to clear my head. If when I come back you still want to try, maybe we can talk about a new beginning. She smiled softly. It wasn't a demand. It wasn't pressure. It was hope that week alone was quiet. Claire took herself to dinner, bought flowers for the house, stood outside under the rain without an umbrella. Just because she felt like it. She no longer needed someone else to remind her she was alive. When Ethan returned, he looked different. Tired, but more grounded. They sat at the kitchen table and talked for hours about the past, about the night at the cabin, about Julian, about loneliness, and about love. At the end of the night, Ethan said, "So what now?" Claire took his hand gently. "I don't want to walk away from everything we've built. But I also don't want to stay in something that makes us both feel less." He nodded. "Can we try again? But this time, not just as husband and wife, as real partners, learning each other all over again." She smiled, tearful but calm. "Let's start from here, from who we are now." The night Ethan first suggested something wild, Claire thought he was trying to fix their marriage. But in truth, it wasn't about fixing. It was about waking up. Not just as a couple, but as individuals who had forgotten how to feel. And while Julian came and went like a passing chapter, he left behind a truth Claire would never forget. Sometimes one moment of being seen by a stranger is enough to remind you of everything you've forgotten about yourself. Claire stood in the middle of her kitchen, sunlight pouring through the window, warming her bare feet on the tile. It had been 3 months since Ethan returned from his solo trip. 3 months since they agreed to try again, not as the people they used to be, but as the people they were becoming. The silence between them had changed. It was no longer filled with avoidance or confusion. Now it was space. Open, soft, honest. Rebuilding was slower than Claire expected. There were awkward dinners, unfinished conversations, and quiet moments where neither of them knew exactly what to say. But there was also laughter again, and trust slowly returning. Ethan had started therapy on his own. Claire began journaling every day and going on walks just to breathe. They no longer shared every detail of their thoughts, but that was the point. They were learning how to be individuals inside their marriage, not just a pair moving in sync. One evening in early summer, Claire and Ethan went out to a quiet dinner downtown. No big reason. Just a date as they sat across from each other, candles flickering on the table between them. Claire noticed something different in Ethan's eyes. Not the old comfort. Something deeper. "I like this version of us," he said. Claire smiled. "Me too." He reached across the table for her hand. "Do you think we're still growing in the same direction?" She thought about that for a moment. "Maybe not always at the same speed. Okay? Yes, I think we are." That night, they didn't rush anything. There was no pressure to make everything perfect. They just lay side by side, holding hands in the dark, listening to the quiet hum of the night. A few weeks later, Julian texted again. "Just wanted to say I hope you're well. I've been thinking about that weekend, not the night, but the clarity it brought. I'm glad you followed your truth. It inspired me to do the same." Claire read the message in silence. She didn't feel that ache in her chest anymore. There was no longing, no confusion, just a calm understanding of the role he had played in her life. She replied kindly, "Thank you for saying that. That night was a turning point for me. I'm at peace now. I hope you are too." He didn't reply right away, and she didn't expect him to. Some stories end quietly, not with anger or regret, but with respect. Claire showed the message to Ethan later that evening. She didn't have to, but she wanted to. Ethan read it, then nodded. "I don't think I'll ever fully understand what that night meant for you," he said softly, "but I do see how it changed you for the better." Claire squeezed his hand. "It changed me so I could come back to us." By mid-July, they decided to leave their home for a while. Not permanently, just to shift the energy. They packed their things and rented a small lake cabin in northern Washington. It wasn't fancy, but it was quiet, with morning fog, birdsong, and no internet. They cooked together, sat on the porch reading books, and talked about things that didn't revolve around work, chores, or responsibilities. They talked about dreams again. One afternoon, as Claire painted by the water's edge, Ethan came up behind her and wrapped his arms gently around her waist. "I didn't know how much I missed this version of you," he said. She leaned into him. "I didn't know how much I missed me either." They kissed not like strangers rediscovering each other, but like old friends finally reuniting after a long journey apart. Fall arrived, And so did more changes. Claire left her marketing job. It had never been her dream, just something she fell into. Instead, she started teaching painting classes at a local studio. Ethan began working fewer hours and started volunteering at a community garden. They were still married, still committed, but they didn't pretend anymore. One evening in October, Claire and Ethan hosted a small dinner with friends. Just 6 people. Nothing fancy. As they cleared the plates afterward, one of the guests, a close friend named Laura, asked, "What's your secret? You two seem stronger now." Claire smiled at Ethan. He looked back at her. "There's no secret," Claire replied. "We stopped pretending everything was okay when it wasn't. We allowed ourselves to fall apart. And then we chose to rebuild, slowly, honestly." I raised her eyebrows. Not many couples survive that. Ethan spoke this time. "We didn't survive it. We transformed through it." The room went quiet. Not awkward, just thoughtful. That night, after everyone had left, Claire sat on the porch wrapped in a blanket. Looking up at the stars, Ethan came out with 2 mugs of tea. "You know," he said, "I still think about that night sometimes. Not in the way I did before, but as the moment we stopped lying to ourselves." Claire nodded. It was strange, painful, but necessary. Ethan sat beside her. "I never thought I'd be the one to open that door. But I think deep down I knew something had to break before we could rebuild." She looked at him, eyes soft. "And I'm glad we chose to rebuild together." Months passed. The marriage wasn't perfect, but it was alive. And that mattered more than perfection ever could. They still had moments of doubt, frustration, and confusion, but they handled them differently now. With patience. With truth. Claire no longer feared silence. Ethan no longer feared change. And neither of them feared who they were becoming. 1 year later, they returned to the same mountain cabin where everything had started. It looked the same, the tall trees, the wooden deck, the view into the forest, but they had changed. They stood on the balcony that first night, just like they had before, sipping wine and wrapped in blankets. Ethan turned to her. "You remember the fire we lit that night?" Claire laughed softly. "How could I forget?" He pulled something from his jacket pocket. It wasn't a ring. They were already married. It was a small folded note. She opened it. It read, "Let's fall in love again. Not with the people we were, but with who we are now." Claire looked at him, heart full. "Yes," she whispered. "Let's." Epilogue. Claire never told many people the full story of what happened that night at the cabin. Not because she was ashamed, but because some experiences don't need to be explained. They just need to be understood. Julian became a passing chapter, a necessary one, a reflection of a life not lived but imagined. He reminded her of something she had buried, her voice, her spark, her longing, and Ethan. He became more than a husband. He became a partner in growth. In truth, in letting go of the past to build something new, their love wasn't picture-perfect. It was real, messy, brave, and chosen again and again. Madison had been feeling different for a while. She couldn't exactly describe it. Not sadness, not emptiness, just a quiet, constant heaviness. It wasn't dramatic, didn't come with crying spells or long nights staring at the ceiling. Instead, it was the absence of something. Of laughter, of ease, of connection. She still loved her husband, Ryan. Their marriage was strong in all the ways people hope for. He was kind, supportive, and never made her feel small. But even love can't always stop someone from slipping into their own silent world. And that's what had happened to Madison. It started after her younger sister passed away 3 years ago. Since then, something inside her had slowly turned off. She still went to work, still hosted family dinners, still smiled in photos. But behind it all, there was a quiet fog. And even though Ryan tried his best to keep their life full, Madison often felt like she was just going through the motions. Ryan noticed. He wasn't loud about it, but he saw it in the way she stopped playing music while cooking, how she stopped asking to go out on weekends, and how she rarely laughed at his jokes anymore. He knew she wasn't angry or distant on purpose. She was simply tired of pretending to be okay. Tired of missing something that used to make her feel alive. Then one Wednesday morning, as Madison poured herself a cup of coffee, Ryan gently asked her a question she didn't expect. "What would make you feel alive again?" She blinked, surprised. "I don't know. I really don't." He didn't push, he just nodded. And the conversation ended there. But 2 weeks later, something happened that would completely shift everything. It was a rainy Friday. Madison had left work early because the power went out in the building. She was looking forward to a quiet evening, maybe reading a book, wrapping herself in a blanket, and waiting for Ryan to get home. When she turned onto their street, she noticed a few cars parked near the house. At first, she assumed it was a neighbor having guests over. But as she got closer, she realized those cars were parked right outside her own driveway, confused. She pulled in and parked beside them. The porch light was on. The curtains were closed. She stepped out, her heels clicking against the wet pavement, umbrella in hand, unsure of what she was about to walk into. The moment she opened the front door, warmth hit her, not just from the air inside, but from the energy in the room. Laughter, voices, movement. She paused at the entrance, eyes scanning the living room. There were 5 people standing and chatting like they belonged there. And in the middle of them stood Ryan, smiling like he'd been waiting for her all day. "Hey, honey," he said, walking toward her. "Don't be mad. I invited some friends." Madison was stunned. "Friends?" He nodded and motioned to the group. "From college? You've heard about them, but you've never met. They're here for the weekend." She looked around. Faces she didn't know. Voices she hadn't heard before. And yet something about the room didn't feel threatening. It felt intentional. "I don't understand," she said, gently setting her purse down. Ryan took her hand. "I know you've been feeling distant. I've been trying everything I can think of. And I just thought maybe the answer isn't in doing something small. Maybe it's in shaking things up a bit." She looked at him, unsure whether to laugh or cry. "You invited 5 people to our house to help me feel better." He smiled, nervous now. "Yes. Not to fix anything, it's just to bring life back into the room." Just then, one of the women stepped forward. She had kind eyes and a soft voice. "Hi, I'm Grace. Ryan's told us a lot about you. We're just here to hang out. No pressure." Then came Ethan, a tall, calm guy with a gentle presence. Then Jordan, always cracking jokes. Melissa, kind and quick to listen. And Tom, quiet but observant. Each one greeted Madison like they had known her for years. She stood in the center of the room, unsure of what to say. This was supposed to be her safe space, her quiet escape. And now it was filled with people, energy, conversation. She looked at Ryan. He wasn't smiling out of pride. He was hopeful but also nervous. He wasn't sure this would work. He just wanted her to feel something again. And, strangely, she did. Not joy, not relief, but curiosity. She sat down, still cautious, but open. That night, the house came alive in a way it hadn't in a long time. They cooked dinner together, laughed over stories from Ryan's college days, and played a simple board game that somehow stretched on for hours. Madison didn't feel the pressure to perform. No one asked her personal questions. They just let her be Dot. At one point, Grace turned to her and said, "Ryan talks about you like you saved him. He said you're the calm in every storm." Madison smiled softly. "I don't feel very calm these days." Grace nodded. "Then maybe it's your turn to let someone else be that for you." It was a small thing to say, but it stuck. As the evening went on, Madison watched Ryan with his friends. She had never seen this side of him, the way he relaxed. The way his eyes lit up when Tom told a joke, how he listened so closely when Melissa talked about her recent move. He wasn't trying to entertain her, he was being himself. And she realized that, maybe in seeing him like this, she could also find a part of herself she'd buried by the time she went to bed. She was exhausted, not from sadness, but from being awake. Emotionally awake for the first time in a while, As she lay down beside Ryan, she whispered, "Thank you for today." He smiled in the dark. It's only the beginning. Madison didn't know what the weekend would bring. She still had questions, still felt hesitant. But for the first time in months, she didn't feel alone in the room. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. Madison woke up the next morning before the sun. The house was still quiet, except for the soft murmur of the rain tapping gently against the windows. For a moment, she wondered if the night before had been a dream. The voices, the laughter, the sudden appearance of 5 strangers in her living room. But when she walked downstairs, there was Grace in the kitchen, already making coffee like she'd lived there for years. Grace looked up and smiled warmly. "Morning. Hope I didn't wake you." Madison shook her head, her robe wrapped tightly around her. "No, I'm just not used to people being up before me in my own house." Grace laughed softly. "Old habit from living with too many roommates. I get up early to have a few quiet minutes before the chaos." Madison liked that. She poured herself a cup and sat at the small breakfast table. Still unsure of how to act around someone who, just 12 hours ago, was a complete stranger but who somehow didn't feel like one anymore. One by one, the others came downstairs. Ethan in sweatpants and a hoodie, Tom with a book tucked under his arm, Melissa already making scrambled eggs, and Jordan joking loudly about how hard it was to find the bathroom. It should have felt overwhelming, but strangely, it didn't. Madison watched them all move through her home as if they belonged, like the house itself had been waiting for this kind of energy again. Ryan joined last, rubbing his eyes and looking both proud and nervous. Madison caught his glance, and for a moment, they shared something unspoken. This was working. Even if they didn't fully understand why breakfast turned into a long conversation about old road trips, favorite songs, awkward college memories. Ryan's friends didn't try to include Madison in every word, but when she spoke, they listened, really listened. She wasn't treated like the wife of their friend. She was treated like part of the group. After breakfast, Melissa asked if Madison wanted to go for a walk. "Just you and me," she said with a smile. "Girl time?" Madison hesitated. "Sure, that sounds nice." They walked around the neighborhood with jackets pulled tight against the chilly air. Melissa asked nothing too deep, no questions about grief, about marriage, or how Madison was really doing. Instead, they talked about books, old movies, and how much Madison missed baking. It had once been her escape, but she hadn't touched a mixing bowl in over a year. "I don't know," Madison admitted. "I just stopped enjoying the things that used to bring me peace." Melissa didn't offer advice. She just nodded. Sometimes peace looks different when you're hurting. That's okay. That afternoon, Madison found herself in the kitchen with Grace, laughing over a recipe for cinnamon rolls that neither of them really remembered how to make. Ethan offered to be the taste tester. Jordan played music on his phone. Tom quietly did the dishes without being asked, and Ryan. He stayed in the background watching it all unfold. He wasn't trying to control the moment or direct it. He simply gave Madison space to be herself again. Not the version that smiled because she had to, but the version who smiled because something inside her was warming up again. That night, they ordered takeout, pushed all the furniture to the side, and played charades in the living room. Madison hadn't laughed that hard in years, so much so that she had to wipe tears from her eyes. It was somewhere between Ethan's terrible attempt at acting out a giraffe and Tom's deadpan jokes that Madison felt something shift. She wasn't pretending anymore. She wasn't hosting guests. She wasn't forcing conversation. She was present and real. And, for the first time in so long, open. Later that night, after everyone had gone to bed, Madison and Ryan sat outside under the soft string lights he had put up in the backyard. The air was cold, but neither of them seemed to mind. "I don't know what's happening," Madison said, her voice quiet. Ryan looked over. "Is that a bad thing?" "No, it's just unexpected. I haven't felt this light in a while. I don't want to lose it." "You won't," he said. "It's still inside you. It always was. I just thought maybe you needed help remembering." She looked at him, her heart suddenly full. "You brought 5 people into our house to help me remember who I am." "I'd bring 100 if that's what it took," he said without hesitation. Madison reached for his hand. "Thank you for not giving up on me." Ryan didn't say anything, but the way he squeezed her hand said enough. Inside. The house had quieted down, but the warmth hadn't left. There were empty plates in the sink, blankets on the couch, and the scent of cinnamon still in the air. It looked lived in, alive. Like a home again, and Madison, for the first time in a long while, felt like she belonged inside it. The final morning arrived with a quiet stillness. Sunlight streamed in through the curtains, softer than usual, as if it, too, knew this was the last day. Madison lay in bed for a few minutes, staring at the ceiling, thinking about how different the house felt now, warmer, lighter, louder, and somehow more hers again. She heard voices downstairs, low, friendly. The kind of morning chatter that meant that coffee was brewing and breakfast was on the way. Normally, she would have pulled the blanket over her head and waited for the noise to pass. But this morning, she got up, willingly. She walked down the stairs barefoot. Her hair a little messy, but she didn't care. In the kitchen, Grace was slicing fruit, Ethan was flipping pancakes, and Jordan was, as always, cracking jokes about everything and nothing. Ryan turned and smiled when he saw her. "Morning," he said. Just that one word, but it was full of meaning. "Morning like a beginning." "Morning," she said back. They ate breakfast around the table like a family. The kind of breakfast where no one checked their phones and no one talked about what time they had to leave. Everyone knew the weekend was ending. No one wanted to rush the goodbye. After breakfast, Ryan pulled Madison aside and asked, "Do you want to go for a walk?" "Just us." She nodded, slipping on a light jacket. The fall air was crisp, and the leaves crunched under their feet as they walked through the quiet neighborhood. For a few minutes, neither of them spoke. Then Madison said, "I forgot how good it feels to be part of something." Ryan looked at her, waiting. "I didn't just lose my sister, Ryan," she said. "I lost the feeling that life could still be full. Like there were still new people to meet, new stories to hear, laughter waiting around corners I hadn't turned yet." Ryan took her hand. "And now, I'm starting to believe again," she said. "I didn't know how much I needed that until this weekend." They walked a little further before sitting down on a bench near the small lake at the edge of the neighborhood. Ducks floated on the surface, and a breeze picked up just enough to make her lean a little closer to him. "I was scared," Ryan admitted. "I thought maybe you were slipping away. And no matter what I tried, I couldn't reach you." "You reached me," she said quietly. "Not with words, but with people. With warmth. With this." Back at the house, the group began packing up. Suitcases lined the hallway, jackets were slung over chairs, and leftover snacks were divided into plastic containers. Madison moved through the house, helping where she could, but mostly just watching, taking it all in. Grace hugged her first. "You're stronger than you think, you know?" Madison smiled, tears forming. "You've helped me remember that." One by one, they said goodbye, Jordan with a dramatic bow, Melissa with a soft kiss on the cheek, Ethan with a comforting squeeze of the shoulder, and Tom with a quiet nod that meant more than words. And then they were gone. The house was still again, but not empty. It held the weekend like a memory in its walls. And Madison felt it in her chest. Like something had cracked open and let the light in. She turned to Ryan, who was standing by the window, watching the last car pull away. "I don't know how to thank you," she said. He walked over and took her hands. "You don't have to. Just don't disappear again." "I won't," she said. "But we need to keep this going. Not the house full of people, part just. The connection. The trying. The living." He nodded. "We will. Together." In the days that followed, Madison didn't go back to being the old version of herself. That woman was gone. But a new one began to grow, one who went for walks in the evening again, who turned on music while making dinner, who called old friends just to say hello. One Saturday morning, she signed up for a community baking class. She stood in the kitchen with 6 strangers and a bowl of flour, and for a moment, she thought about that weekend about how strangers had walked into her house and somehow brought her back to life. Ryan picked her up after class, smiling like he had when he first fell in love with her. "How was it?" Madison laughed, holding up a slightly burned cinnamon roll. "Deliciously average." He laughed too. "Let's go home." Home, the word had changed. It was no longer a quiet place where she disappeared. It was where she returned to, where she grew, where she healed. Months passed. Seasons changed. But the memory of that weekend stayed fresh. Not because of the pancakes or the charades, or even the people themselves, but because of what it reminded her that sometimes healing doesn't look like therapy sessions or long talks. Sometimes it looks like opening the door and letting new life walk in, and real love since always in grand gestures. Sometimes it's in 5 unexpected guests, a few cups of coffee, and someone who refuses to let go of you. Even when you've let go of yourself, Madison would never forget the moment she walked into her home and found 5 strangers smiling back at her, because that was the moment her story started again.